My favorite thing to do when I meet someone new who I know is into video games is to ask them if they have any weird or unique stories from playing games. Usually I'll get one of two responses, either something weird that happened during an online match, or something stupid they did in a game when they were a kid. Online stories are pretty fun, but I find them to be quite repetitive. Usually they're either there was this cringy kid on the mic, or some dummy was being salty. It's usually the stories from people's childhoods I find most interesting, because usually they're full of just weird childisms, if you know what I mean. Like weird leaps in logic, or like they were afraid of certain things in the game that you should never normally be afraid of. And speaking of scaring kids, that brings us on to our term of the week. Childhood trauma. I really shouldn't have said it that way. I know this trend was started by Yums, and I know I'm not one of the cool kids, but I'm doing this anyway. I'm going to be talking primarily about video games I played when I was a squirt, because I remember playing many more games when I was younger than watching movies, and I don't remember really being afraid of any movies when I was younger. I was either super cool or just amazingly oblivious. Either way, I'm here now, hi. The one movie I remember being kind of scared by was Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I went to see it with my mum and a friend of mine, and I remember hiding in my shirt the entire movie, expecting some sort of jump scare to come out and just just horrify my little soul. But it never did. I was so disappointed, or relieved, one of the two. The Harry Potter games, on the other hand, used to scare the living daylights out of me. I don't think this game is very fondly remembered. I've only heard one other person ever mention this game. I can see why it wasn't particularly amazing. It was a rather bizarre Zelda-ish clone thing game, I think. The controls were like pseudo Ocarina of Time, like you had to push Harry up to a surface that he could jump on to actually make him jump. He couldn't just jump by default, which I found really weird when I first played it, because I'd played a buttload of Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, so I was used to just being able to jump, but no, Harry can't jump. Some chosen one you turned out to be. Go get me a coffee, pleb. Now, I remember this game starting off super chill, but later on in the game they'd introduced these trolls that you had to throw these mushrooms at to get them to sneeze so you could walk past them, which sounds pretty weird. These trolls were completely unkillable, so all you could do is stun them and run past. Which, that horrified me when I was younger. I'd played games where nearly every enemy was killable, and suddenly, like, these huge towers of meat were just completely indestructible. These trolls were the reason I put down the game for good. I still haven't gone back to play that game because, well, I don't really care. But there was a sequence later in the game where you were locked in a dungeon, and there was a troll on a bed that had the key to the door. Now, you needed to use the Wingardium Leviosa spell to lift the cage off the key so you could escape. Now, Babby Leroy seemed to think if I used the spell that it would just wake up the troll anyway, which kind of defeats the point, but I can see where my thought process was coming from. So yeah, I never beat a game because of my fear of trolls. All this talk of trolls reminds me of one of those old-fangled lol cows. I'm not a lol cow, I'm like totally cool, no one laughs at me, Oh. Another game I remember being well and truly terrified at was Spyro 2, oddly. I remember the majority of the game, like Harry Potter, was like this whimsical, oh, it's really easy sort of like game. But then, like, the first boss, you've got to jump down a hole to go get to him. And once you're down there, you're pretty much stuck with him until you defeated him. But the thing was, like, 4 to 3-year-old Leroy just could not figure out how to defeat the first boss in Spyro for some reason. I don't know why. I actually came back to this one. It wasn't like the Harry Potter trolls. I did eventually beat that boss and got a bit further in the game before I gave up. Yeah, I have a very short attention span, apparently. I don't even know how I finished these videos. But this was over the period of like 2 years, so there was 2 years where Crush's Dungeon was the most threatening thing I'd seen in gaming for so long. I don't remember why. I don't, like, looking at it now, I think it's just because the boss is, like, invincible when you charge straight into him, and I was used to everything just dying like that. I don't remember what the strategy is off the top of my head, because I'm dumb, but I did defeat him. I was victorious eventually! I'm not making these sound very traumatic, but trust me, 3-year-old Leroy was totally super scared by that big pixelated troll. Really. Or when you're like 3, like, everything is the scariest thing ever. So, while I was writing this, I asked my brother if he could think of anything that scared him when he was younger. I'm going to refer to him as the Noodle Man, because he knows what he did. Now, he's a decent amount younger than me, so I assumed there'd be a slight generational gap between us. And he told me he found the Rabbids absolutely horrifying when he was younger. Which, in all honesty, makes sense. I don't know why these things were presented, these minion-looking, like, abominations were put forward as, like, a thing that Ubisoft to market. Well, maybe they're not super frightening, but they look horrifying. They look like they're soulless, because they've just got this gormless look on their face constantly. And they pop out of nowhere and just scream. It's like, what are you doing? Why did you... Ugh. Real talk though, the Rayman thing that always freaked me out was the Kanaran from Rayman 3. It continues this trend of enemies, like invincible enemies, just scaring me to death. But not only were they invincible, you also encountered them in really tight corridors half the time. I remember the majority of the gameplay is just trying to distract them so you can walk by. A lot like the trolls. This is a really odd trend that's been popping up over my traumatic history. Moving away from invincible enemies, water and lava are two things that have always triggered me in games. Mostly because the old Sonic the Hedgehog games scarred me for life when it comes to water. Only in video games though, because IRL I'm cool with water. I'm not hydrophobic, so it's cool. But like rising water and pressure in general in games is one of the things that scares me the most. I remember when I was younger, I wouldn't even attempt to do things like time trials or like time doors, because I don't know. I would always freak out whenever I was placed under a time limit, because I was a scaredy cat little boy. Being chased by things too in games used to always horrify me. I remember I used to be so awful at those the chasing levels in Crash Bandicoot, because I would always freak out the second I saw anything following me. I don't remember much of it in Crash 1, but I remember when I played Crash Twinsanity a few years later, there was like a mission where you were like in a boat and you were being chased by like a seal with a cleaver. I was always stupidly awful at that because I would freak out whenever I got close and I'd just die instantly. I'm not very good at games, incidentally, apparently. Send help. So there's a brief look into my gaming psyche as such. Pretty repetitive, but you know, it's me. It's what I do. You know, it's a thing. I might do more if I get bored and find other ways that games horrified me when I was younger. Maybe when I was a bit older. But yeah, I might start posting actual animations here at some point when I'm not being lazy and I actually get something out. So be prepared for my first short animation in the year 2083. But yeah, so we're done now. There's a Twitter over there if you want to moan at me there and see me post really unfunny jokes. There's the art theft video over there. People liked that one. They thought it was super duper cool. And if you want to call me silly names in the comments, you can. Goodbye, my love.